Joining us now is Jungsoo Ahn, the Interim Executive Director of Rising Voices on the Oakland County Megacast. Jungsoo, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate having you on. So first off, you are also the Executive Director and Chief Teaching Officer at the Michigan Teacher Education Network. Can you tell us about that network and some of the work that you're doing in the education front across the state?
Oh, great. So the Michigan Teacher Education Network is an offshoot of a project that I led at Teaching Works at the University of Michigan, which is a research center and an organization that is dedicated to improving the quality of teacher preparation for children in the United States. So the work that we did at the Michigan Teacher Education Network actually had to do with first setting like a professional standard for entry into the profession, because in the teaching profession, there currently is no such thing as there is in, say, like doctor or nursing, or in medicine or nursing. So, when you think about a medical student who graduates from their program, what they need to actually show competence in prior to entering the profession is a professional set of practices or skills or whatever that might be, right? So in medicine, that might be something like, I don't know, like making sutures or like drawing blood or whatever that might be. In teaching, there's no such thing, and we really saw that as a problem, and we sought to create a professional standard of entry into the profession, but then just understanding the way that education works and the vast inequities that we see in the landscape at large, especially towards populations that have been historically marginalized over time. What we sought to do was really leverage our work in the Michigan Teacher Education Network to disrupt the patterns of inequity that we see in teaching through the preparation of teachers.
And then another organization you're in a leadership position with now, you're also the Interim Executive Director at Rising Voices, and that's primarily what we have you on today's program to talk about. Can you give a background for those that haven't tuned in before? We've had previous interviews with people from your organization. Give us a little bit of an overview of the work that Rising Voices does.
Yeah, so it's so funny, like I haven't been asked to talk about Michigan Teacher Education Network in a little while, so I was a little bit caught off guard, but that's Michigan Teacher Education Network, and right now I'm gonna switch hats right now, and Rising Voices is a really cool organization. There's no other organization like this in the state of Michigan, and it is an organization that is dedicated to building power for Asian Americans in the state of Michigan, specifically women and families. And the reason why we're focused on women and families is because we know that women are the gatekeepers to their communities, and we know the power that exists within women. Also, if we actually look at the landscape at large and the world at large, and just see how like so much of it is male dominated, but in the pockets where we do see just matriarchies and where we do see that there's leadership with a great amount of women, we see a lot more success, and we really believe that women and families are worth the investment, and that's what we seek to do through Rising Voices.
And then what are some of those specific ways that you do organize and lift up those voices in the community, particularly of those women and those girls, to provide that sort of bolstering of their ability to go out in the community, not ability, but their effectiveness of going out in the community and taking on a leadership role, not just in the Asian American Pacific Islander community locally and beyond, but in the general community as well?
Yeah, so we have multiple strategies to power. So one is really like the one-on-one deep organizing that we would see in the community. So our organizers are out in the communities conducting meetings with people who really have leadership potential but might not be able to realize it yet, and really empowering them and taking them up a leadership ladder so that they can see themselves not only as agents of political change, but as people who could assume leadership roles one day, either in public office or maybe within the infrastructure. They might really see themselves as one who could, be chief executive officer or something like that, or program director, whatever that might be, these positions that they otherwise would not be able to see in themselves. So we really put a lot of investment into our people within our deep organizing that we do. Another big part of our strategy is actually political electoral work, where we are very much engaged in the elections statewide, top to bottom ballot. And the reason why we're invested in political electoral work is because that is one strategy toward achieving power for our community. And then other ways that we are really invested is like there are specific campaigns and issues that come out of our community that are not only about our community as Asian Americans, but these are issues that would be really good for all children or all women across the state. One of these campaigns that we're about to launch in August, actually, wow, so soon, is what we're calling just like the our Vote for Our Families campaign. And that is a campaign where we are focused on making sure that Asian American history is represented in schools. And it's not just Asian American history, but it's also Black history, Indigenous history, Chaldean history. There are a few bills in the Senate right now that could possibly be passed, but we are really going to mobilize our communities to pass them. But this campaign in itself is not just the legislative campaign, which I just described, but it's also a bottom-up campaign where we're also hoping to mobilize teachers who are actually the most important people in the system. Teachers touch more lives with more frequency than any other profession on any given day. So we want to make sure that our teachers are really honored, that our teachers are prepared to teach these things to our students, and that the teachers regain the joy that they have toward teaching through actually learning about and being able to teach about our students as they truly are in schools.
So what are some of those important relationships that help to foster these sorts of efforts, particularly on the education front, to put these marginalized communities' histories into history lessons in the school environment so that our communities, especially in a state with as diverse of a population and so many different pockets throughout the state of people, to have those shared histories and those unique histories all collectively being taught in our schools?
So yes, you cannot teach the histories of like every single person and the full histories of like, you know, every single person, right? But I think that representation does matter. And our campaign is not just about, you know, what histories are actually taught, but it's about the teaching that happens in front of children on any given day in schools. And because like, basically the landscape gets wrong at large, and I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of people, is that if we just change like our curriculum, if we just change like the history books, then people will actually be able to see themselves and they'll you know, be empowered or whatever that might be. And that's right to some extent, right? But children are paying attention every single day to what adults do in front of them. So the way that children actually learn about marginalization, the way that children actually learn about racism, is through what happens in front of them and what adults are doing in front of them on any given day. So what we hope to do is not only change, you know, the histories that are taught, but we also want to be able to make sure that there's also much more representation in terms of who the teachers are. You know, 92% of the teachers in the state of Michigan are white, female, upper middle class to middle class, right? And so like, what does that signal to a child who may be, you know, Asian American or Black American or, you know, Indigenous American? What does that signal to them in terms of who holds power, who has access to knowledge? And so that's one important facet. We want to change like the teacher pipeline. The other thing that we also want to teach or change too through this campaign is what teachers do in front of children. And what we know from teacher education and from teaching are that most teachers who enter the profession, a very, very common story is, I was a wreck in my first year of teaching. The problem is that that story means that you were a wreck in your first year of teaching, and you are learning on the job on children who might be learning how to read for the first time or learning how to do addition for the first time, right? So we want to be able to make, like, basically bound what we're doing in the profession so that that story is no longer the case. And while we're making sure that that story is not the case, to make sure that we're disrupting the patterns of inequity that happen in front of children on any given day through the teaching that happens in front of them.
We're joined by Jungsoo Ahn, the Interim Executive Director of Rising Voices, joining us on the Oakland County Megacast. More information can be found on their organization's website, risingvoicesaaf.org. That's risingvoicesaaf.org for more information and resources from Rising Voices. And Jungsoo, as we talk about the influence that kids that adult behavior has on children, one that's really unfortunate and quite disturbing over the last several years during the COVID-19 pandemic has been the rise in anti-Asian rhetoric out in the community, certainly in hate crimes directed at the Asian American Pacific Islander community in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as so many other incidents of violence against communities of color and other marginalized communities throughout the U.S., including here locally in the Detroit area. And that brings us back to an unfortunate anniversary, the 40th anniversary of the murder of Vincent Chin in the Detroit area, who, just for context for those tuning in, was a local man that was at his bachelor party and then was brutally attacked outside by two auto workers simply because of his ethnicity. They were angry about the rising power of auto companies in Japan and attacked him brutally, and days later he had died as a result of those injuries. Can you speak to the legacy of the murder of Vincent Chin and how that speaks to where we're at now in terms of that hate rhetoric that's out in the community, but also how that incident and these other incidences have had an impact on civil rights activism within the Asian American Pacific Islander community?
Yes. So we're just coming off of, a weekend of commemoration of Vincent Chin's life and death, which is probably the most kind of pronounced hate crime that happened toward Asian Americans in history, other than the Atlanta shootings. I think that what we're really seeing right now after 40 years from his death, is that not much has changed, And the question is, why has that been? And a lot of it, I think we really need to actually start looking a lot more closely at, so that these same things don't happen 40 years from now. What we see in the media currently is that there's a lot of rhetoric and a lot of messaging around AAPIs, around hate and harm. And we know that this is an issue and it's been amplified in the news, right? But we don't see as much about AAPI news and histories about just like the everyday and what we do on the daily and kind of the power that we all have. So when it comes to actually being able to advocate for our communities, what we also see from the time of Vincent Chin until now is that our populations, the Asian American populations, have not been talked to over time, politically, right? Or civically, whatever that might be, but we have largely been ignored from the rhetoric around racial relations, pigeonholed either with white people or Black people. But we are our own people, and that's why we actually need to build power as a community. Especially in the state of Michigan, we are very much set up along a Black-white binary in terms of racial relations. That makes it very hard to build power with others, and to advocate for others, and to build power for ourselves. The thing that we really combat as a group is the model minority concept. And the model minority concept is something that says that, basically Asian Americans are the model minority. We are, white proximate, we're the best of the minorities. This is, first of all, a concept that was not placed on us by us. It was placed on us by those in power. And it is one concept that, though, there are some people who might say that we benefit from it. What it very much does is it conceals the actual realities of what is happening to Asian Americans on the ground. And it's extremely problematic because it's of its collusion with anti-Blackness racism in ways that fail to account for structural racism and harm coalitional politics, as well as for its erasure of anti-Asian racism and social problems impacting Asian American communities. You know, Atlanta happened last year, right? And people were just like, whoa, this is happening or whatever. I can't believe that this is happening to Asian Americans. Like, there was anti-Asian hate. And that's something that, you know, in our communities, we've known for quite some time, but it is only just right now being spotlighted. And we need to make sure that these efforts continue. So again, that Vincent Chin or events like Atlanta don't happen again 40 years from now.
And that speaks to what you said earlier, and the angle of leadership being so important, and the electoral influence of these marginalized populations, whether it be the Asian American Pacific Islander community or other marginalized populations, putting them in leadership positions, or at least or at the very least, those that are in leadership positions, intently listening to these communities and heeding their advice and doing what they can and what they should be doing to promote, as you had said in your previous answer just now, all the good things that are happening through these communities and because of these communities, to promote all the good that they're doing and the change that they're promoting in our communities. What more can our leaders be doing, or what should they be doing to benefit or to advocate alongside of organizations like yours and others in your community?
I think, like, first and foremost, we have a set of values at Rising Voices that we really hold our leaders accountable to. You can find them on our website, and I don't know them actually off the top of my head. I've only been at Rising Voices for 6 months, but they very much represent like who we want to be as Asian Americans in the state of Michigan and beyond. What we really seek from our leaders is actually that we are acknowledged as our own population, that we are acknowledged as people who are agentic and who have power, and that we are not pigeonholed into a model minority. I think that the other things that we're hoping that our leaders really hope to uplift within our communities is not just like looking at us as the fastest growing, population in the United States, according to the census data, and therefore, having the ability to actually flip elections, not just looking at it in a transactional way, right? But actually being able to go into our communities, see what's going on there, seeing the joy, seeing the love within our communities, seeing us for who we truly are, other than like who they thought that we were, right? And then being able to uplift those values of joy and love within what they do for, whatever they're doing, and then also for our communities themselves.
Jungsoo, there's so many different ways now for people in all communities, and especially in marginalized communities, to have their voices heard, to make their voices heard if they're not being heard. And so for you and your organization with Rising Voices, what do you say to those in your community that about the power that they can make themselves to have their voices be heard, to be active in their community? Speak to that and how important it is to have that grassroots activism that ultimately inspires activism on a wider scale in and outside of your community.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great question. I think that what we really see in the world right now is that there's so much harm and hate and heaviness. And, if we actually don't feel empowered and find the love within ourselves, find the love within our communities, and leverage that to fight the harm, the heaviness, and the hate, then we will continue to be completely sort of crushed by all that we see in the world. So when we think about power at Rising Voices, it's not like gaining dominance. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to like replace another race, or we're not trying to do any of that. Any of these other rhetorics or like narratives that are out there about what marginalized communities are trying to do right now. That's not what we're trying to do. I want to very, very clearly underscore that. what we're trying to do by building power is say, like, you also have the ability to be and to do, to be seen, to be heard for exactly who you are and who you could possibly be in this world. The problem is that because of the way that our systems and structures have been set up, that many of us are not seen and heard for who we are in this world. For example, I know that there are many people who feel like through schools, they were never seen for their full potential. So therefore, you know, when it came time to actually go to college or whatever that might be, they never were seen as somebody who could go to college. So they didn't go to college, right? And that is entirely dependent on like where you are, what the structures are, what the systems are within certain communities. And that's what we mean by like, let's empower our people to push back on those systems and structures that have not been so good to us over time. So what we're trying to do is really make sure that people see kind of the power within them, the love within them, to see that like love is actually feeling empowerment too. And then to be able to not only find that within them, but also to like spread that to others so that we can build in like goodness together. And that's what we do at Rising Voices.
We're joined by Jungsoo Ahn, who is the Interim Executive Director of Rising Voices, joining us on the Megacast. More information can be found on their website, risingvoicesaaf.org. That's risingvoicesaaf.org. And Jungsoo did mention earlier that they do have a link that gives in detail the values of their organization and their goals as well. That can be found by going to their website at risingvoicesaaf.org and scrolling over the Our Work section at the top of the page and then clicking on values. And you can learn more about everything the organization is doing and what they are advocating for. On their website, once again, risingvoicesaaf.org. Jungsoo, just another few minutes with you before we'll say goodbye. Anything else that we haven't touched on today that would be important for our audience to keep in consideration at this time in terms of the goals of your organization, the work that you're doing in the community locally and across the state at this time?
I think that, you know, Michigan Asian Americans do have a pretty different experience than Asian Americans on the coast because of the sprawl and the geography of the state in itself. And so we are in like a really, really cool spot right now because there's a lot of attention on Asian Americans right now. And I think that for us, we need to seize on this opportunity and not let this go. And so even though it is hard because you have to drive to like Grand Rapids to do like a field canvas shift or whatever that might be, or, you know, you have to drive like 2 hours to go from, I don't know, there's a lot of driving pretty much. We like need to actually keep at it because when we're thinking about our children and when we're thinking about the futures and when we think about like what we went through, just like growing up in Michigan, and when we think about what our parents went through growing up in Michigan, either as immigrants or whatever generation your parents might be, we need to make sure that like those things, those hard things that we went through, like we don't really want our kids to go through those things. So if we don't really want our kids to go through those things, we need to make sure that we're building power for ourselves within us and within our communities as well.
Jungsoo, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.